Okay, so the new banners that were just announced happen to be insane, so insane that I actually want to talk about them for once, and tell you why you should really consider pulling for it. Hello there, Flip here, and today we're going to be going over the 4.4 first half banner. Yap, let's get into it. Starting off with the 4 stars, we have 3 very good ones at that. For a general overview, Gaming is fucking broken for a 4-star damage dealer, and even competes with the mid to high tier carries when he gets his C6. Noel, while I do think is the weakest out of the 3, is still quite powerful as both a 4-star carry and driving option for Arena teams. And then we have Farizon, who's one of the strongest supports in the game in terms of her buffing profile, but it's only for Onoma units. But it so happens that Onoma damage dealers are very strong, so being able to buff them is wonderful. And she gives them so much buffs that it makes Wanderer and Zhao teams competitive with the strongest teams. Speaking of the Onoma Twink, actually, if you have Zhao on your account, this banner is literally for you. A lot of people wanted Farizon to be on Zhao's banner, as that would mean you could get some of his cons, or Zhao himself, while wishing for Farizon to get to her ludicrous C6. But this is actually a better alternative. Looking at Zhao's constellations, they're all kind of shit, but now on this banner you can roll for Zhongyun, who's an amazing buffer for Zhao with the chance to get Farizon, and on top of that, Zhongyun constellations, especially her C2, is going to be a bigger increase to Zhao's damage than wishing on any of his alloy level constellations. And if you've been saving for Zhao for a long time, you can spend some of your summons here to get a copy of Zhongyun and some Farizons, and you'll be good to go. Now with that pretense out of the way, let's first talk about the 4 stars, kicking things off with everyone's favorite mage, Noel. Noel's ranking in the meta is pretty much tied hand in hand with Fiorina, as because of her healing, you're able to max out Fiorina's fanfare generation, and this can be used well on both carry and driving teams. Carry teams want you to also have a C6 scorer to further maximize Noel's damage, and these can either be G3O teams or double Hydra double Geo teams. Both are quite solid. However, if you don't care too much about Noel's damage and instead you want your Fiorina to do a lot of damage, well, you can just run Noel on full defense pieces with Archaic Petra and Favonius to lower Fiorina's energy requirements by a lot and allow her to deal more damage. And then from there you can slot in the other 2 Jingchos and a flex unit. I made a guide breaking down these teams in depth, so make sure to watch it. Let's now talk constellations because all of them are pretty good. Noel's C1 is essentially her usable status, as her healing trigger chance is now 100% when her skill and burst is active, giving her better synergy with Fiorina. C2 is pretty nice for charge attacking to clear mobs of enemies, but isn't a massive damage increase. C4 is honestly pretty good, giving Noel close to 100k nukes when her skill pops. And C6, yeah, we know this is the massive one. A 40% damage increase whilst giving her a ridiculous amount of burst up time that you can even cheat without killing enemies, and allows building depth to be superior than attack. Very good constellations, and Noel is worth a spin if you have Fiorina and want to change things up. Moving on, let's talk about my girl Farizon. I want to make an entire guide for her to complete the F saga with Fiorina official and now her, so stick around for that. But her kit is very straightforward. It's just basically her burst, which reduces Onoma resistance by 30% and boosts Onoma damage by 30 to 38% depending on talent levels. At C0, she's still the best in slot for both Zhao and Wander's hypercarry teams, and no, her energy requirements aren't even that bad. I think they're even over exaggerated. There is no other stat you want to build on the Gilf anyways, and with Favbo and an ER Sans, and assuming there's another Favonius user on the team, which is realistic on these hyper teams, you won't ever have to build more than 270 ER on Farizon, 213 of which is literally already done for you, and if you're using 2-piece emblem, even less. Her cons are all pretty fine except her C1, and at C2 she's a complete unit, but she also gets so much more at C4 and C6 that playing her without these things may feel terrible. So overall, Farizon is a great unit, and I'll go into further detail in my guide, so make sure to subscribe for that. Now Gaming. Due to some things I cannot share, Gaming is really good even without Zhongyun, and even without his C6. Pretty much Gaming is an on-field pyro damage dealer. His skill makes him do a special plunge, and his Q lets him spam this special skill, but it's not instant, so you will have to do some actions in between. If you have Zhongyun, then you can plunge, otherwise just do normal attacks until it comes back. Gaming can vape basically everything in his kit, so his best teams are looking to be vape with Zhongyun or double Hydro teams. His Chevreuse teams are also pretty solid with Fischl and Bennett, and even though yes you can play Melt, due to how cringe it is and all the buff up time and cry up time bullshit and Rosario circle impact, his Melt teams just feel bad to play unless the enemy turns into a vegetable and doesn't attack you and stands still. His Monopyro teams are below both his Chevreuse and vape teams, but they do well enough. Onto constellations. None of them besides his C6 and C3 really do anything massive for his damage, but they give him good quality of life. Speaking of which, C6 is a game changer. It gives him 80 CV for existing, because why not? Though because of the Hunter set and potentially using a crit using a crit rate weapon like Serpent, overcapping on crit is very possible, but it's a big consolation for him nonetheless. Okay, I'm stalling. The 5 stars. I've made a lot of videos on Jeonyeon, so you can check them out for more focused thoughts, but she looks to be extremely strong actually and enables a lot of carry's best teams. Riding double Hydra due to TTDS and being able to add a plunge at the end of your N4s. Zhao for obvious reasons. Diluc becomes not only a viable but quite competent carry whether on Bennett or double Hydra teams. Funnily enough, Bennett teams are just as powerful as Diluc Vape teams. Gaming uses Jeonyeon very well, it's one of his 2 best teams for sure. I just can't tell if it's better than double Hydra Bennett. Hu Tao is able to add a plunge to her jump cancels and there seems to be no issues with vaping even in single target. And with the Elan, Yai Aggravate can now use a competent healer and this is relative to her other Aggravate teams. Jeonyeon herself is actually a good on-fielder as well in Taser or double Hydra teams as a driver, and because of how much she buffs plunges, even her own carry teams are quite strong. She'll be doing 100k skill plunges, it's so funny. So yeah, Jeonyeon is pretty good if you have any of the units she works well with. She is very heavily glued to Furina though, being a healer, so if you're already playing Furina and Nouvellette, giving that up to play Jeonyeon teams may not be the best of trade-offs, and some of the units she makes better already have really good teams regardless, so you have to decide whether that's worth it for you. Okay, so very hot bird bomb covered. Nahida. She's the best Dendra unit, and not only that, but because of her strong and long-lasting Dendra application, she allows you to play around with some dumb teams to experiment with. She's great in every aspect of Dendra teams, all 3 seed teams, spread teams with Tignari or Alhaitham. If you have Neelu, you really strongly want to get Nahida too. Aggravate teams do generally prefer to not have Nahida on them, as the trade-off to running a defensive option isn't huge, on top of actually having mitigation in these teams. So if you only want to play Aggravate teams, then you don't really need Nahida. But besides that, she covers everything pretty well, and if you have the means to do so, the Hyper Bloom core of Jingzhou and Kuki is also very cheap and can clear content fine. In conclusion, Nahida is very good and she doesn't have that many cons to pulling, other than if you have Baizu, he can fill in her roles quite well, and especially so after Furina. And you also shouldn't feel the need to pull Nahida just because everyone says she's a must pull. I've cleared every Abyss without Dendra teams because I just don't like them, so there's no pressure to play these teams at all if you don't want to. For the weapon banner, there isn't much to say. Both the 5-star weapons are good on their respective character, but because they're supportive, you can compare them to other supportive options available, and they don't stand out massively enough to warrant pulling, so I don't think either the weapons are for your primos. In conclusion, the characters on all these banners are amazing and can be helpful to a multitude of accounts, with the 5 stars both being extremely standout supports in their archetypes, and the 4 stars being the best at their job as 4 stars. That will be it. Never mind, as I was recording this, for some reason the second half banners are out, so I guess let's go through these as well. And compared to the first banner, what the fuck is this dookie 3-month-old rotten tomato ass banner? Kicking things off with the 4 stars, Jeonyeon is not very good at all. In the meta, her best team is just using her with C6 Bennett for Mono Pyro, as she shields and you can use her there for fun if you like her. She can be used on Virgin teams though, they aren't that great because of how small her radius is and uptime issues, and none of her clones are really that useful. Not very much to say about her. Okay, moving on to a character that's interesting. With Ningguang, as much as people meme her, she does actually have a very good role now in Navia teams. Navia really wants a second Geo unit for Geo Resonance, and because she doesn't have that many synergistic teammates, adding in Ningguang, who does a pretty respectable amount of damage during Navia's downtime and buffs with her A4, isn't a horrible trade-off. Ningguang does have carry teams of her own too, which although have been swept away due to how much the power has risen, will still clear with enough investment. Ning's best cons are her C2 and C6, and overall she's just fine now. Lastly, we have Yaba, who's a pretty good defensive Dendra option. Nahida Light is pretty much used in Quicken teams supporting Alhaitham or for double Electro Aggravate teams. She's also good on Bloom teams, and yes, she can be used on Hyper Boom and Burgeon if you're lacking defensive options there. And it's not like Yao Yao is bad by any means. The difference between her and Kirara and Baizu on these teams is so small it doesn't really matter. Well, I guess in Baizu's case it does matter a lot, as Yao Yao doesn't have amazing Furina synergy due to her field time. But yeah, she's a defensive Dendra unit, and they are valuable, so if you don't have Kirara or Baizu built, she'll be a good pickup for you. For constellations, they are fine, but they also don't do an insane amount for her. C1 gives the active character a small Dendra damage bonus, which is nice for Alhaitham or Tignari teams. C2 helps by giving Yayo energy, but this weapon exists and already gives so much energy. C4 gives her EM for her HP, which is useful for Nilo teams and is irrelevant everywhere else. And C6 improves her healing and Dendra application by quite a bit. None of these 4 stars are really worth rolling for, especially considering how lackluster some of the constellations they have are as well. But at the very least, the 5 stars will not not as good as the ones in the first banner, are still great. Both of them are carries, so there's not a whole lot to say, but Zhao, especially with all the right things in place, is a top 5 carry pretty comfortably. That's pretty good AoE and single target. His only real downside is lack of weapon options, which reigns high if you didn't get a Jade Spear or Homa for him, but even having one Deathmatch or Blackcliff and you should be good. If you have the tools in place, you won't regret him at all. Now Yai is very good on quicken teams, either with Alhaitham or Tignari on spread, or her own aggravate teams, which are the strongest currently due to her being able to frontload a lot of damage with her fast electro application on field and strong off-field presence. There are also Chevreuse teams you can play with her, which look pretty good and comfy to play. We'll see more when we're in an abyss where enemies can actually be affected by Overload's drawbacks. And again, not much to say, she's just a pretty good damage dealer. As for the weapon banner, the 4 stars like With's Stringless and Favonius Lance are all strong weapons. Lithic and Lion's Roar not so much. Kagura and Jade Spear are both best in slot on their respective characters, and even while not having full passive synergy, they still work well on other damage dealers. Yai now has the Flowing Purity weapon, which at R5 is close enough to Kagura that you don't need it, and she can also use all 3 With's effects. But Zhao, he has like no weapon options, so you can consider Jade, but at the same time it's a standard weapon, but you can't control what standard weapon you get, so do with that what you will. I don't think that it's worth it, and you may have to save for Blackcliff for a free to play option for him. All in all, one banner is the best Genshin has ever had. The other sucks ass. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment if you're rolling on these banners, as I'd love to hear it and I respond to almost every single comment. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. Peace.